Welcome back to the second episode of Season 6 of Highside, Lowside. I am Spurg, joined always by my co-host, Zack, sitting right there in the captain's chair. And we have got a heck of an episode in store for you today. If you remember back to the first episode of Season 6, we've changed a few things up, and we're going to dive right into Not the News, where we're going to talk about some of the changes in the industry right now in the ADV and dirt segment. We have got a full discussion for you on beater bikes. Should you ride motorcycles or should you preserve motorcycles? And our guest for that conversation is going to be the one and only Ari Henning. He's also going to stick around and play a little game with all of us. It's called Rev Trivia. If you remember back to the first episode of Season 6, we've got some engine sound games, so make sure you stick around for that. And as always, you want to make sure to stick around to see if you won a t-shirt as we go through reviews and listeners' comments that really struck the fancy of Mr. Quartz and myself. But before we jump into any of that, Zack, let's get in a word from our sponsor.
If you know anything about Highside, Lowside, everybody, you know that we have a long-standing sponsor in Motul. Motul makes engine oil, chain cleaner, all kinds of products for your two-wheeled, three-wheeled, four-wheeled, maybe even five-wheeled vehicles. We don't know your life. The point is, Motul is a very kind sponsor of Highside, Lowside. If you go to RevZilla.com/Motul, you can shop Motul products and learn more about what is available. So we thank you very much to Motul, and please, again, if you have any need for any of those products, go to RevZilla.com/Motul, that's MOTUL, to shop products. Let's start the show, everybody.
Welcome back, Zachary. It's good to see you, as always, here on the old Highside, Lowside set. You're looking good.
Thank you. You too, my friend. I hope that the audience feels the same way we do. We feel like we're getting a little bit of rhythm here. Season 6, we made some changes, but I feel good about it, and I'm ready to just move right along, keep the momentum up.
Yeah, for those of you that might be joining us for the first time, and maybe you're not familiar with what we're doing here in Season 6, we are going to jump into a segment that we like to call Not the News, because typically by the time we record these and they actually get released, any extremely topical news is always a little bit out of date. So what we like to do is we like to pick a topic that is relevant to the current state of affairs, but then we want to kind of dive in and discuss it a little bit more on an in-depth level versus just reporting it the way a news program might. So, Zack, what do we want to talk about today?
So this is from an article on Common Tread at RevZilla.com. Please do your daily due diligence and go to Common Tread to find your actual topical news and first ride reviews and that kind of thing. This story is about how ADV and dirt bikes continue to lead the U.S. motorcycle industry. And at first blush, that's sort of an easy thing to understand. Dirt bikes are selling more than any other kind of bike. But Spurge, when we talked about this, you had some more in-depth and interesting information about this. And I feel like it's very much worth sharing with the viewers and listeners.
So I think there's often some confusion in the motorcycle industry in general when we hear the term dual sport. I think it conjures up different pictures of different motorcycles in different minds, depending on what your experience level is or what your personal riding background is. And there was a comment on this article by an individual named Dave Inva. And I think sometimes these names that are in the comment section aren't necessarily the person's actual name, but let's just call this person Dave.
Are you suggesting people don't always use their real name on the internet?
I've been surprised before. There's times where I'm like, there's no way that Johnny Thunder Rocket is his real name, and then Johnny Thunder Rocket rides in, and he's like, no, my mom really was a huge fan of Thunder Rockets.
Susan Thunder Rocket.
Yeah. So
whatever.
let's just call this person Dave. Dave wrote a comment in this article saying, I find it very surprising that dual sports are leading the market from a motorcycle sales standpoint because they're so outdated. The technology really hasn't changed much, and there's not much that goes into the R&D budget for a lot of these bikes. And I think the important thing to note is that when the industry is reporting on dual sport motorcycles, and when you see these articles come out, whether it's from Common Tread or it's from other sources, dual sport, in the way these numbers are reported, refers to any motorcycle with a license plate that can go on-road or off-road. And the example I'll give you is from my personal garage right now. I've got, Nicole has got a KLX 230L from Kawasaki, which cost us a little over $4,000. And that is truly a dirt bike with a license plate. And I would say it's not really even a performance dirt bike with a license plate. It is as low down in the totem pole as you can pretty much get for a new motorcycle from a technology standpoint. And then across the garage is a brand new KTM 890 Rally Adventure R, however you want to spit that out. And that's got all the bells and whistles. So I think it's important to note that when we're talking about the dual sport segment, it is a wide swath of motorcycles that, fall under that umbrella.
So any bike that can go off-road, how do they determine that? By tires, or like the manufacturers make that classification, right? So a Yamaha Tenere 700, Yamaha has said, this bike can go off-road, so it'll be classified as such. Whereas like an MT-07, Yamaha is a mid-sized naked bike, and Yamaha would not classify that as an off-road bike, though you could take it down a dirt road if you were, crazy.
Correct. So I think really, and this gets back into, you hit the nail on the head with some of the classifications that OEMs put their own bikes under. So this, in addition to this article, there was a backdoor communication going with some of the management at RevZilla around some of these statistics that had just come out. And there was an anomaly where they were correcting, the reporting was actually correcting a blip, because when the Pan America was first released, Harley, prior to that, that's Harley Davidson's Pan America, which is their adventure bike. Prior to that, there hadn't been a dual sport segment within the Harley Davidson line. And that bike had gotten misclassified when it was originally reported on. They're going back and they're fixing that data now.
So it got misclassified as a street bike, and now it's classified as a dual sport?
If I understood the messaging correctly, it had been originally classified under a street segment, and now it's going back and it's being classified correctly in the dual sport segment.
Which is interesting, because the Pan America will largely be used on road. In fact, many owners will probably never use it in the dirt. They might only ever use it as a sport touring bike. But this is how data works, right? Like,
but that's also the same. I mean, that's the same case for a BMW R1250 GSA,
100%.
Or anything
true.
like that.
Very true. Yeah.
But I think from a number standpoint, and I'm actually going to get into that a little bit later in the topic, as far as like beater bikes and what you should be doing with motorcycles.
Gotcha.
But from to really look at this data, I think if we would have been looking at this data 20 years ago, right? The segment that was selling more in the motorcycle world was probably either cruisers or sport bikes, and those were like the flagship models. So like if you had all this new technology, chances were the sport bike in the lineup got that technology first. And really what we're seeing now is the dual sport segment, because it does include adventure bikes, and adventure bikes have become this flagship model for a lot of OEMs. That's where all the technology is coming into play. So if you want the hottest, greatest tech in a bike, chances are you will find it first in the adventure category, which is really the dual sport category.
Right. So I guess to boil it down, if we wanted to really be as efficient as possible to deliver this news to people, the interesting note to us was that adventure and adventure touring motorcycles are sometimes, if not often, classified as quote-unquote dual sports in some of these data reports, which means when you see a story such as the one that you surely read on Common Tread that says ADV and dirt bikes continue to lead the U.S. motorcycle industry, that would include some bikes that you might not have expected or might not have considered a quote-unquote dual sport. But
Correct.
Realistically, they are dual sports, and it's sort of like it's either very accurate or it sort of skews the data depending on your perception of that term.
Yes. And I think for me, one of the things that I've heard this question a lot, and I think it was important for us to kind of clarify that for people. And I think there's probably an entire other podcast about like, what is a dual sport motorcycle? And I think we can have some fun with that. But when we're talking purely about the sales here too, from the standpoint of I believe it was like a 4% bump in increase year over year of already a pretty tremendous growth year, considering the state of affairs of motorcycling, and some of the other categories are still really struggling with supply chain issues. I know there was a blurb in this article about Polaris and Indian motorcycle sales were down like 40%, and a lot of that they were blaming on just lack of dealer inventory. Harley sales, Lance talks about the fact that really there was a shutdown at the factory because of a brake issue. So like some of those numbers are a bit skewed. So I think we're probably still a good 12 to 24 months out from really figuring out what the true demand is right now, because we have no way of knowing how many motorcycles would have been sold if some of these motorcycles would have been available on dealership floors.
Like you said, whole other podcast.
So
the point is,
ADV
go. Bikes are selling well, and that may make it seem like quote unquote dual sports are selling well, but it's not necessarily your uncle's clapped out XR 650 that's been the same since 1997 that is selling particularly well. It is also high tech new motorcycles. Very good note, Spurgeon. I like that.
There you go. So let's go right ahead and jump into the episode today. We're going to get Mr. Ari Henning on here, and we are going to talk about what constitutes a beater bike. Should any bike be a beater bike? Should you own a beater bike? Is there such a thing? Do all bikes belong in museums? Who knows? Let's discuss. Let's get Ari on.
There he is, everybody. My friend, Ari Henning. Thanks for joining us as always, buddy.
Hey, Zach. Hey, Spurg. Glad to be here as always.
Good to have you with us as we decide to talk about beater motorcycles and whether or not motorcycles should be used or preserved.
This is a great topic for Ari, because Ari, you love riding motorcycles. You also love working on them. So
I do. I got strong feelings about this topic.
Preservation versus riding. So just a quick background, because we're gonna get very distracted very quickly here. I can tell. This whole idea spurred from a question that we got via email that we did actually address in our viewer listener comments episode from season 5. It is from Adam from Canada, who essentially wrote in and said he bought this 1986 Yamaha SRX6, which is a sort of like naked single cylinder 600cc Yamaha from the 80s. And his dad was like, "Oh my God, the SRX, that's a classic. You can't ride that." And Adam was like, "No, but it's the bike that I just bought. I want to ride it." And so he's been riding it around. So he emailed us and said, "Is my dad right? Should I be saving this bike? Or am I right? Should I just be flipping riding it?"
Yeah.
And the basic guidance we gave Adam at that point was just ride it. Like, I think you're doing the right thing, you know? But it did, it's been brewing between seasons, and we were like, what was the right thing to do? So first thing I'd like to do is to address Adam's question specifically, which Ari, you actually never did because you weren't a part of that episode. What do you think about this SRX 6 in particular? Did Adam make the right call?
I mean, that's the beauty of Adam owning it. He gets to do whatever he wants with it, and it's his choice. So I think that, he probably knows in his heart of hearts what he truly wants to do, and it sounds like he wants to ride it, and I would encourage him to do that. If his dad is that desperate about preserving it, then, he should find an example of his own.
That's actually not dissimilar from what we said, Spurge. I think at some point when we answered this question originally, I said, if you can afford to do so, maybe find him a low mileage one and get it as a gift, then he'll have one and you'll have one and everyone will be happy.
But I think we all, I would just say that we're probably all on the same page at this point, that like he's doing the right thing by riding the motorcycle, because it sounds like that's what he wants to do. It sounds like he bought the bike to ride it. He really had no intentions of preserving it or making a museum piece until his dad got in his head. And I think that, in this case, you can ride the bike, respect the bike, and not feel like you're doing anything wrong about it.
And it's a real slippery slope when you start buying bikes and keeping them as preservation pieces, because boy, that's just a slippery slope.
So this is a good segue, I think, into the first question that we wanted to float around the room here, which is sort of, what type of person are you? Do you think in general, like, do you think nice things should be run into the ground because it was made to be used, or do you think that we should preserve things here and there? So guest honors as usual. Ari, I think I know where you're going with this.
I feel like we're all on the same page here, but very similar to your father, Zach, Tim Courts, I do not have especially nice things because I like to use them extensively, and I don't have, I've got my dad's CB350 Sportsman bike, which is probably my most prized possession in all of my existence. And I race that annually, and have even crashed that. And when I ride it like he would have, which is to win. So I think that's a good example of, like, nothing is too precious for me. And I don't think I would really allow myself to own something that was so precious that I didn't want to use it, because that just seems like a waste.
Right. Fair enough. Spurge?
So this is where I wanted to talk about, I got the newest issue of Kiplinger's magazine here, and this is, for those of you not aware if you're listening, Kiplinger's a financial magazine that I get every month.
And when you get to your late 30s, you're for some reason drawn to reading Kiplinger's.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
But it was funny because I was talking about this, and Zach was like, I used to have a subscription to that. I wonder if I still do.
Yeah, my father-in-law got it for us. And yeah, anyway.
No, but there was an article in the newest issue, which was actually very topical. And there was the title of the newest issue was Great Places to Retire. We're not there yet. But I do think it's important to note that last year on the list of places to retire was Chase, our producer, Chase's hometown of Kalamazoo, Michigan. Unfortunately, Chase, it's not on this year's list. But anyway, fighting inflation with collectibles is actually a topic that they're talking about here. And they talk about cars, they talk about wine, they talk about instruments, and they talk about like whether or not this is a smart move to do from an actual investment standpoint. And when I'm looking at something like a bottle of wine, there's really no way to get enjoyment out of that outside of drinking the wine. So the idea of like collecting a bottle of wine to me purely for value, I don't see any reason to do that. That's just not my thing. However, when I'm thinking about motorcycles, automobiles, musical instruments, things like that, those are things that I do believe you can enjoy while you're riding. However, the value completely is up in the air at that point. Like if you have a low mileage Yamaha SRX6 and you're trying to preserve value, you don't want to go out and ride it. So I think for me, it's really a matter of like, what are you buying the bike for? If you're looking at your latest issue of Kiplinger's magazine and you're trying to figure out 4% of your portfolio in a larger investment strategy, like then that's a separate topic.
That is approaching it from a very different perspective than I thought we were going to approach.
No, but I do think there's people out there that think about that, right? Like if you're buying,
those are collectors. Those are already people who are collecting in order to preserve for value.
Well, so Spurge, what? Not to burn down Kiplinger's and their advice on this, but let's burn down Kiplinger's and their advice on this. What's the upshot of that article? Did you read it?
So the upshot, I did read it. The upshot of the article is that if it's not a bad idea that there is a way to help stave off, as long as it's up to, I believe it was 4% of your overall portfolio. So adding in collectibles to a well-diverse portfolio isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
So
but that's also what those people want to hear.
Well, so then the MB5 and the Honda Spree I have, you're saying is good for my retirement.
Well, so you
as long
have
as it's not more than 4%.
I then had to have the conversation with Nicole. So you should probably have the conversation with Lauren and make sure that she's okay with like diversifying your portfolio.
Well, now I'm just going to tell her when I bring a new bike home and be like, honey, this is part of our retirement plan.
Exactly. That clapped out Honda Spree. That's going to be worth
you
a
just
lot
watch. It's going to be worth a lot.
So
I'm surprised that even Kiplinger's would make that recommendation, or that would even suggest like, yeah, not a bad idea. Like if you want to buy a vintage car, like it might be worth a ton of money someday, and like it might be, but what a risky play that is.
Big time.
But time out, because I do think this goes back to another magazine that I read that Spencer Robert gave me on. I think it was a Road and Track magazine, and they actually talked about like the top 20 cars that have outperformed the S&P 500. From a year-over-year interest standpoint. Again, I don't want to get too far down that road, but like there is a real market out there for people that are looking at motorcycles as an investment tool.
Right.
When you think about bikes that maybe are like a vintage Norton or something that actually has ascended in value. That's a Vincent Black Lightning, right? Like that's probably more of that market that we're talking about. But as far as the type of person that I am, I'm using this example to kind of foreshadow, like I do have a bit of a collector's mentality with things.
I mean, you do it with guitars, right? You've got quite a collection of guitars and amps.
Yep, with guitars and even with motorcycles. Like I think I like having a couple of motorcycles around. I think in my head, I'm always trying to figure out like, am I going to make a little bit of money on this, or am I going to lose a little bit of money on this? So I do have that mentality about me as my natural personality. However, I believe that motorcycles are meant to be used. So while I do have a couple different bikes in the garage, they're all getting ridden, they're all being used, and I do think that for the most part, I am a use it, don't just let it rot away,
right.
collector.
Well, I'll add my 2 cents really quickly, which is I'm largely in the same camp as the two of you, maybe more so Ari. The bikes, like the experiences we have on them are what.
That's the point.
Yeah, that's what we are delivered, not necessarily the thing itself. But I do think that this admission that you have just revealed, Spurge, about how you have this sort of collector's mentality that tickles the back of your brain sometimes. I'm curious about how you would address and rather than do guest honors this time, I think I'd rather push this to you based on what you just said. Have you seen a bike on the road that should have been in a museum? Have you ever seen a motorcycle that someone was riding or using that you were like, that should be saved, or like that, or that should be in my garage where I can save it? That's a slippery slope.
I'm going to answer that. But before before we move on from the initial you part of this, because I feel like we glanced over something. So you talked about siding with Ari a little bit more here. Mm-hmm. What about, you talk about and tell stories about the KTM that you have in your garage and how like you really wouldn't sell that. Is that more of a collector's mentality for you, or is that more of like just the fact that you enjoy riding that bike and it represents a piece of your history?
Well, yeah, good question. And I guess I was going to try and save this for later in the podcast, but I think this
we can do that if you want me to, if you want to.
Well, I think it's a kind of a foundational flaw, I guess, that I'll point out with our whole podcast topic. Right, might as well start at the beginning, right? Which is that I feel to a certain extent you can save and ride a motorcycle.
Absolutely,
and
that
that's
should be the idea.
Right. That's what Ari does with his dad's vintage race bike. He is cherishing it and saving it and maintaining it and keeping it in working order and keeping it,
keeping it in the lobby of RevZilla West.
That's right. Even in the lobby of RevZilla. And I don't think none of its glory is tarnished as it sits in the lobby of RevZilla West right now. And yet it's ready to be raced and crashed if necessary, because that's what it was designed to do. So I think you can sort of do both things. You can kind of have your cake and eat it too. And obviously not with like a 0 mile Ducati 916 or something like that. Like you can't ride that because then it doesn't have 0 miles in it, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a gray area there, but that's, I guess, my KTM is a bike that I just feel is worth more to me than it is to anyone else. And I will continue to ride it and do wheelies on it and take it to go-kart tracks and slide it around. And so I'm risking my own investment, I suppose, but I also just feel like the noise that it makes and the feeling that it gives me is why it's on this earth. So,
and the value in that motorcycle is primarily sentimental. It's not actually a valuable bike. It's not.
How
it's not,
dare you?
It's not especially rare. I mean, it's the same thing with my CB350. It's all sentimental.
Yeah, totally.
And perhaps part of the reason I'm willing to potentially risk harm is because it's already a smorgasbord of parts from junkyards. It's not like nothing on it's necessarily one of a kind.
That's actually brings up a really interesting question. But go ahead, Spurge. I'll write it down.
I was just going to say, like, as the both of you are describing this, I was in an interesting situation recently with my T100, and my T100 is the one bike that I often talk about, like I wouldn't sell. It's a 2005 Bonneville, and I was at a dual sport event, and there was a guy that showed up on like a 2006 Triumph Scrambler and rode the entire event on this, Triumph Scrambler, one of the more modern classics. And afterwards, he's like, "Oh, you should bring your T100 out next year." And I was like, "No, like this is like a full-on like dirt bike event, and like there's 80,000 miles on that bike. I've made it this far. Like I don't want to just take it and like destroy it in the woods."
Plus,
with
you have
some
better
knobby
bikes
tires.
to ride in the woods.
But
true.
I think that's where I started finding myself drawing a line of like, if you would have asked Spurgeon, 10 years ago to just hop on this bike and do it, when that was the only bike that I had at the time, I probably would have tried it out. But as that bike has become more sentimental in value, I also don't want to go out and just destroy it for the sake of doing something, ridiculous with it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Well, perspectives change as
Sure.
you said, as you get older. Like it's your objectives with the motorcycles evolve.
Your perspective changed, your objection. You start getting Kiplinger's magazine, for example, like stuff like that. Anyway, I think we should let's move on. I want to put that question to you, since you said you have a collector's mentality. Have you, Spurgeon Dunbar, seen a motorcycle being ridden or used and thought, no, like that needs to, like, this is a part of world history or motorcycling history, and they couldn't.
So I don't. Anytime I see a motorcycle, like, and the one that really came to mind when I was thinking about this was, I remember the very first year that Ducati released, and I think it was the only year they released it, the Desmo RR, like the $75,000.
The Desmo Sedici, the MotoGP replica, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember I was living in LA at the time, and a guy had brought it up to Angeles Crest Highway and was hanging out and was ripping the hell out of it. And I remember thinking, like, That's awesome. Like, he's probably the one person that bought that bike and actually used it versus bought that bike and let it sit in the garage, and he was in full leathers and everything else.
Right.
And I remember thinking, like, that's awesome. I do think, however, there hits a certain point from a value perspective where I start to hesitate as to, like, I would take that bike out and ride on the street. I probably wouldn't go do a track day with it. And, like, the one bike that I've ridden like that comes to mind is when I got a chance to ride the BMW S1000 HP4 race, where you're getting on a bike where this is worth like $75,000. So when I look at the two of you, I know that the two of you have much more experience racing high-end, high-value motorcycles. Ari, you most recently with the Yoshimura project. Do you have a point with a motorcycle, or I guess this question back at the two of you, that's about, like, when you hit a bike that's worth $70,000, arguably that could be in the museum. Do you have any hesitation for taking that bike and not just riding on the street, but like actually putting it into a performance setting?
Did you just take a question and turn it into a question?
I did.
You did, yeah. You didn't answer the question. Very political of you, Spurgeon.
Yeah, I pivoted.
Yeah.
No, I think no. The answer to my question is no. So I've never really seen a bike on the road that I felt doesn't deserve to be on the road. The answer is no. I think that I actually get a lot of enjoyment when I see people riding bikes that others do not ride.
Yeah, that others would be too timid to. And it all depends on, like, what's that person's bank account look like. Because some guy buys a Desmond Medici RR and, like, it might just be money to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally fair.
But for the two of you, if you had a chance to take a $80,000 motorcycle, would you have a point where if you owned that bike and it was in your garage, would you limit what you would go out and do with it?
I think we've played this game a lot, where it's like, if you can only choose 3 bikes and one of us always chooses a really expensive bike, with the rationale being then I would sell it and buy 5 of something else. So I don't see myself owning some bike that's worth that amount of money. I think I would derive a lot more pleasure out of having other things worth less money, because I don't know. I don't want like a Desmond CGRR.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, I was considering it as sort of like a more objective, like, journalist point of view of would I ride and threaten the safety of an expensive motorcycle?
We do it all the time.
Yeah, and the answer is absolutely.
RC213V, Super Leggera, like all sorts of bikes.
Yeah. Ari and I have been lucky enough to ride $100,000 and $200,000 bikes on a racetrack, and I think that it's special because the bike is so expensive and limited and rare, and maybe even the experience is more special because you think, man, maybe part of it is the risk of it, but really, like, what soaks into my soul in those scenarios is sort of, this is what it has been meant to do. Yeah, exactly.
But I also think, as journalists, we're in a unique position because the bikes we're riding are new, and their only significance usually is expense. But if you talk about, like, you and I have ridden a early GSXR 750. I've ridden fully restored H2s. Like, those are bikes that you ride that are, like, yes, they're valuable, but they're also getting to the point of being irreplaceable. And I think those are two very different parts of this conversation, where it's something new and expensive that's worth a lot, and something old and potentially irreplaceable. It's also worth a lot.
Yeah. So this is a good pivot, and this is something I wanted to put to you guys actually that I wrote down beforehand. So Ari, you rode Eddie Lawson's personal Eddie Lawson replica Kawasaki, and it was
rode it out of his garage.
His number in those days was 21, right? And this was VIN number 21, which was given to him by Kawasaki, or he bought from Kawasaki or whatever.
Correct.
And the bike was valued at like $1 million. It's basically priceless. Like, he doesn't want to sell it. No one knows how much it would go for, but it's incredibly valuable. And in that scenario, this intrigues me, because there are other Eddie Lawson replica Kawasaki's out there that are not VIN number 21, that do not belong to Eddie Lawson himself. And if you ride VIN number 23 or 47 or 165, you would get ostensibly the same experience in riding that motorcycle as you would from riding Eddie Lawson's personal bike. But if you crash Eddie Lawson's personal bike, you've smudged history of motorcycling, right? Whereas you could have had the same experience on a different bike. So should that bike just be locked up, throw away the key, and look at it?
No, and I think it's great that it's not. And I think it's fantastic that he was willing to let me, some punk 20-something-year-old, take his motorcycle out and take it for a ride, because I think Eddie's of the same perspective. And he also, won lots of championships on lots of bikes. So, like, that one's significant because it was an early one. But I think generally speaking, this is revealing that there are two camps. There are collectors and there are riders.
Right.
And the Venn diagram of them, I think the overlap in the middle might be kind of narrow.
Yeah.
Well, so it's interesting because I want to back up to something that Ari said, and I think it's a good point to recognize. Like when I was speaking of the Desmodici RR, that was a bike that had just been released. The individual took it out and he rode it. When I think of something like Zack, I'm thinking specifically to, because one of the ones that I have written down was an RC30, which you actually did some video content on recently for Daily Rider. Mm-hmm. And like when you're taking out something that's like an RC30, that is a little bit more irreplaceable at this point, right? They're not going to make any more of those. So do you have a hard time when you get on a bike like that, or is that something that's running through your mind as far as like, should I be riding this? Like what happens if, somebody pulls over in my lane? Like, does that ever go through your head?
Yeah, but I still fall on the side of the fence of, when you go up, it might be a trivial BS little ride that I'm doing, but I go up an on-ramp onto 405 in Los Angeles, and it's not like the RC30 was designed to do that, but like when it comes on the power and it starts to sing, there's a special force in the universe that some Japanese engineer that worked on it is like, yeah, that's what it was for, is to spin up and be used. And
for the audience that haven't watched that episode, did you take the RC30 on the dirt jump?
I don't think I did, actually.
That's taking it too far. There's enjoying it and using it, and then there's abusing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Using it for something that it was not designed to do.
Exactly. And I think that was sort of a case of, I'll ride it around, and if I get left turned on, like if someone hits me on it, then like that's a shame for that bike to get damaged. But like I was using the bike as a motorcycle. If I ride it down a dirt path next to a railroad track and I tip it over, I'm gonna have some pretty tough questions to answer about why I was doing that, because that bike is not for doing that thing. But I guess I'll pivot. I'd like to ratchet it up a notch. So we talked about Eddie Lawson's bike and that kind of thing. And I one of the things I wrote down was, so like, suppose you had take the Honda RC30, which is, for those who don't know, a bespoke sport bike that Honda made to take on the World Superbike Championship in its infancy in the early 90s. Rare, exotic Honda superbike. And I think we all just agreed that like riding that bike around is what it's meant to do. What if there was an RC30 that, I don't know, that Soichiro Honda himself had ridden? Like it was the last bike that Mr. Honda himself ever rode, theoretically, and it was this RC30. Is that bike, like, kind of like I said before, like, should we just save that one? Maybe it's the last bike that Mr. Honda ever rode. There are other RC30s you can ride. Like,
I think we're trying to like cast judgment on such big picture questions that ultimately boil down to the individual that claims ownership over it.
Yeah,
like,
I guess
don't know, if it's really, you can only answer that question for yourself, and I can only answer it for myself, because like there's going to be so many scenarios where like
but for yourself, do you feel like in that situation that bike should be saved and set aside and put in a museum somewhere?
As if I'm owning it, or just it's out there and like it might go to a museum with Honda. If I'm owning it, I would still want to ride it. I would do it in moderation, but like motorcycles are tools. Like, a paintbrush that's not used to make a painting, in my opinion, is wasted, and a chisel that's not used to craft something out of wood is also wasted. So like a motorcycle needs to be ridden. I'm not going to ride it from here to San Francisco and do a 1,000-mile road trip, but like, ride it along the PCH for 10 miles once or twice a year. Enjoy the damn thing.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And I mean, you talk about like a Britten V1000. There are only 10 of them in the world, and usually when you see them ridden, it's like at Barber Motorsports Park Vintage Days, and they have a professional rider take a few laps on it so that everyone can see it and hear it and appreciate it. But realistically, everyone's kind of like, let's take it easy with that bike, right?
But I'm glad you bring up the Barber Museum, because that was, that's a place where every motorcycle in there is meant to be ridden, and they take them out and ride them. So if you attend a Vintage Fest, you can see one of 10 Britten V1000s get started and ridden around the racetrack, and everyone there gets goosebumps, and that's something that George Barber, the proprietor, the owner of the Barber Museum, recognizes. So he's in the same camp as us. He obviously pours a tremendous amount of money into preservation, but he also recognizes that these machines were built to be ridden, which I respect immensely.
So then for either of you, getting back to what the original question was, is there any example that either of you could even think of? Because it sounds like no, but I want to make sure that we're clear. Like, is there any example that either of you would either have where it's like, hey, this one is off limits, of a bike that has been ridden on the road or that you saw on the road that you're like, you know what, that is where I would draw the line, and that bike shouldn't have been in use. Do either of you have one that comes to mind?
I'm on the fence about the thing that I proposed, like the I don't know, like the last bike that Barry Sheen ever rode, or like I don't know, some bike that has some kind of like historical significance, and there are other ones just like it. So as far as the delivery of an experience on two wheels, why use that one? And I think that, if there was an RC30 that was the final bike that Mr. Honda had ridden, and it was in a museum in Japan or any museum anywhere, I don't think I would feel
conflicted about it. Not being
I wouldn't think, oh, come on, like, let's just ride it. Give me a break. I would look at it in the museum and I would think, yeah, fair enough. You know what? Fair enough. Let's just keep that one there. That's okay with me. Whereas I do see some bikes in museums and I think, man, come on. Like,
Honda Superhawk, get out of there.
Exactly. Okay, so I do have one other thing I wanted to put you guys in this little section about bikes that are ridden that should be in a museum. I interviewed Claudio Domenicali a number of years ago, who's the CEO of Ducati, and I asked him if he'd ever ridden a MotoGP bike, a Ducati MotoGP bike, because if I was CEO of Ducati, I'd probably be like, hey, let me take one of those things for a spin. And he's a decent track rider, Domenicali. So I asked him, and he said, he basically said, I'm not worthy. I don't ask to ride it because I don't think that the machine, should be ridden by someone like me. The machine should be ridden by people who know how to ride it. And so I don't touch that. Which is
a tremendous level of self-awareness and reverence for what his own factory is creating.
Yeah. And it's not like the dude learned how to ride yesterday. Like, he drags knee on a Panigale. Like, he knows what he's doing. He could appreciate what a MotoGP bike can do, but he just says like, no, I just don't go there. And, maybe it was a little bit of PR spin because he's given an interview and he's trying to, make the MotoGP bike even more hallowed than, or maybe he just didn't want me to ride it. I don't know. The point is, do you guys have any bike that you think that way about? Like, is there any bike that you're like, I shouldn't even be in charge of that because it's too hallowed, it's too special?
I'm going to let Ari go first, but I just want to say that Claudio Domenicali is probably one of the scariest people. Like
definitely would be a good villain in a movie.
Absolutely.
He sat at my table.
Hopefully he doesn't listen to this.
Yeah, well, I mean that in like a respectful way. Like, he carries himself in a way that I'm like, hey man, whatever you want to do. Like, I'm cool. Like,
Exactly.
I respect you. He has a real presence about him. We had dinner together. He was at my table for the Desert X launch, and that was the first time I had met him in person, and I was like, yeah, I get it. That's why this guy's in charge. So yeah.
He does have a CEO aura.
But anyway, I'm sorry, Ari. You go first.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard question to answer. Nothing springs to mind. Like, no individual motorcycle, and I think that probably is a factor of what I've been doing for the better part of 15 years now, which is generally riding motorcycles that I'm not actually supposed to be on, or I guess I am supposed to be on, but I don't feel qualified to. I got over that a long time ago, basically.
Yeah.
Someone would be like, here, ride this. And I've certainly turned down offers to ride bikes, often at track days or something. Someone would be like, hey, take my bike out. And I'm like, whatever. It's fun. But I've ridden a bike like that before, and I recognize that even if I'm being careful, something can happen. So I don't want to risk damaging your motorcycle. I appreciate the opportunity, but like, I'm all set. But no, generally speaking, I relish the opportunity to ride super rare, cool motorcycles because I'm in it for the experience, and each bike offers a different experience. So I don't like to say no to that.
Yeah, I racked my brain. I had the same reaction. I couldn't think of a bike that was special enough that I'd be like, no, I shouldn't try that to see what it's like. I would be too thirsty for that information, for that experience.
I think mine is more like, the two of you are obviously much more experienced for like road racing than I am. So like, I think my limitations come from like, if we were at a track day, because that's where like, I don't like riding other people's bikes. I don't like the whole like, hey, why don't you try my bike out? And honestly, like when I was on the S1000 HP4, like I would have just rather been on a regular S1000 RR, because I find myself riding differently out of fear for the machine and possibly doing some damage, because I just don't want to be that guy. I've got to that point in my career where, I don't want to be the person, totaling an $85,000 motorcycle. However, I don't necessarily feel that same way on the off-road side. I'm probably a little bit more confident when it comes to adventure bikes or dual sports. And, for example, recently at the Get On Adventure Fest out in Mojave, there was an individual named Jim. You might know him as Web Bike World Jim, who had a Norden 901 that he let me ride, and I had no qualms about hopping on his bike and taking it down the advanced trail in the beginning there and just seeing what it would do. So I think for me, it definitely comes back to what category of bike it is and really where my ability falls at that point.
That's fair. Yeah. All right. Well, that was a fun discussion. The next one, we're going to go to the other side of the rooftop here on the next question, which is, have you seen a bike shuttered that should be on the road? Have you seen a bike in a museum that you think, come on, that like, let's just ride it already? And I think I know where this is going.
Yeah. Where do you think it's going?
Well, we just said we'd ride it flipping anything. Nothing's too sacred, right? So like,
it's such an individual decision, and like I don't want to knock anyone. Like I've seen plenty of motorcycles parked in people's living rooms, and like they're like, oh yeah, that was my race bike when I raced AFM in like the 70s or 80s or whatever. My dad put a TZ in his friend Dan Shoemaker's living room as a gift, and like that bike sat there, and like I never looked at it and was like, oh, it should be ridden. Like it's up to the individual. So like to each their own.
But go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Zach.
I was gonna say, so what this comes back to is sort of like, you probably wouldn't do that. Like what if someone gave you a gift? Like, what if Kenny Roberts was like, I want you to have my TZ750 from 1977 or whatever. I made that up. Like, would you say, you'd ride it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess it's interesting. You're being very clear with your delineations, of like someone else's decision versus your decision.
Correct.
Which I think is noble. But whereas I'm sort of drawn to like, if you saw someone making a decision like that, you wouldn't have a tickle of think like, oh man, like if that were me, I'd be riding it. So like, therefore you should be riding it.
I mean, there's probably a tickle there. I can't think of an example per se, but
that's
like
fair.
I'm sure, when some restorers track things down all the way to getting an original owner's manual, an original toolkit, and they're like polishing the rivets on the seat because it's just like so special. But at the same time, I recognize that it's something they get enjoyment out of. Like I personally would get more enjoyment out of riding the bike, but if they want to geek out on doing a complete period correct restoration and then it's just going to sit there in their living room, then like, sure, do your thing. I think that's goofy. I think it's a waste of time, but like to each their own.
So where I think I fall in this is, and I was trying to think of some examples, right? Because I know we were joking about the bikes that we see in the garage the most. And I think Zach was like, Harleys are bikes you see in the garage most. And I went the opposite. I was like Ducatis, like Ducati owners, like keep their bikes pristine and, more make them
well, it was
look
partly
good.
because Chase said he had, like every boss he's had for the past 15 years has had a Harley that they don't ride, which sort of like stuck in my head. But I think you're right about Ducati. There are probably a lot of Ducatis that sit around too. That people just want to look at.
I think as I was going through that in my head, I think the one category, this gets back to my personal taste, but I think the one thing that gripes me is when you see adventure bikes that aren't being used. When you see adventure bikes that, because I've been to the events, I've seen the people where it's like as soon as there's a piece of dirt on it, they have to polish the dirt off and they have to make it look, just like showroom condition. And I think for me, I take a different approach, especially to that style of motorcycling. And I remember I had the conversation with Lance when I bought the Rally that I have now, where he's like, hey man, that's pretty expensive. Are you going to feel weird about riding it? And it's like, well, no, I bought it for a specific purpose and I spent the money on it because that meant it was going to do that one thing that much better. And that's what I was looking for. So I think for me, when I look at the adventure segment, I wish that all bikes were used and abused and dirty. And I actually wrote an article in the most recent issue of Common Tread Journal where it ended by saying like, garage queens just don't have as much fun. Like the bikes that sit in the garage, they don't have as much fun as the bikes where you actually get out and you use. And I think that's kind of a synopsis for not just the adventure category, but for a lot of what we're talking about here.
Yep.
That sort of speaks to an ethos I have, which is if it's too nice or too pretty to enjoy, then you done screwed up. Seriously, like you see guys at the track who've like put a bunch of money into a custom paint job, and then they're like, "Oh no, I don't want to ride too hard because I don't want to crash it." And it's like, then what the, like it's a track bike. Or the same thing with an ADV bike. You bought a beautiful ADV bike, and you're like, I don't want to take it off road because I don't want to drop it. Then like,
I don't want to ding my crash bars.
Yeah, then you screwed up.
You're like, they're called crash bars.
You made a mistake.
Well, it's interesting because you had mentioned Barber earlier, and I think I naturally gravitate towards bikes that aren't, pristine examples. And there was an example once down at Vintage Days where I was talking to a guy. He's like, look at this row of bikes. He's like, which one would you rather have? These first 6 are the Moto Guzzi Eldorado over there with like a PBR beer can, welded on to as the exhaust pipe, and it's, rusted out. It looks like it's been through hell. And it's like, that's the one that I would naturally gravitate towards. Is like, oh, I like this one,
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I one thing I wrote down as a note for this question beforehand of have you ever seen a bike in a museum that should be on the road? The overarching thing that kept coming back to my mind is this happens all the time, right? There are more bikes than there are riders. Like there I would say far more people who have multiple bikes and not enough time to ride them than there are people who have 0 bikes and wish they could, aside from maybe kids. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that this is really common that someone might own 6 bikes or 12 bikes. I mean, there are collectors with hundreds of bikes, individual people that we've never heard of that just have lots of stuff sitting around, which in some ways is a little bit of a shame, right? They have the means to collect these things and they like having them. But when you think about our overall mantra that we've sort of shared about like bikes are meant to be used, you think about someone who doesn't have a bike that wishes they could ride, and then someone who has a garage full that can only ride a certain number. Is there a little bit of an imbalance in the universe there? Isn't that kind of a shame?
I think the question that comes, and I know we have to take a Motul break, so I don't want to go too off topic here as we tend to do sometimes, but like, it makes me wonder about like, we should have had a question in here about like, what bikes are people collecting that shouldn't be, like, who is saving a Honda Shadow 750? Like, if you're listening to this podcast right now and like, that's like your collector's bike.
That's your Kiplinger's investment.
It's not, Kiplinger says no, like pull it out.
Honda is, and a fun fact is that Honda keeps 2 of everything they produce for basically posterity, and also I've been told for legal reasons in case there's ever an issue with like a recall or an accident or a lawsuit. But that's something they do. So like no matter how lowly the machine, there's 2 of them tucked away somewhere.
Interesting.
Which is kind of reassuring.
Yeah, it kind of is. And I actually would also like to circle back to Barber Museum really quickly, which if you've never been to Barber Museum, it's a fabulous motorcycle museum. It's a fabulous museum if it were full of lumber, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful
full
building.
Of teacups. It's just gorgeous.
It's awesome. But the bike collections are great. And one of the reasons I think, my dad pointed this out to me, and I think about it often. One of the reasons that the Barber Museum is so fantastic, I think, is that there are stacks and stacks of motorcycles. Like there are thousands of them. And every time I'm at that museum, there's a couple old fogies with mustaches pointing to a bike and saying like, oh, I had one of those back in 1980 something, because the Barber Museum doesn't just have rare stuff. It has everything. It has stuff that you didn't really ever think. It's just like, universal 2-stroke something or other from Japan.
They have Honda Superhawks. You can get a Honda Superhawk.
Probably a Honda Superhawk. I mean, they just have lots of stuff. There's a Honda Shadow there. I guarantee it. Yeah. And a Honda Shadow is not a bike that anyone aside from Honda ever thought to save, probably. But it's there. And I think that's the cool thing about Barber. And I appreciate that it sort of includes lots of rare, bespoke, expensive stuff, but also really generic, run-of-the-mill stuff.
Sort of a Noah's Ark of motorcycles.
Totally.
Well, the other cool piece, just wrapping up Barber, and then we'll take the Motul break, is that the entire center of the building is a giant elevator. And when you get to the bottom floor, the building actually opens up out onto the racetrack. And when we were there the last time, one of the guides was talking us through the fact that like every single one of the bikes there has to run. And they take all the bikes out and do laps on the track. And every single bike in that museum gets used, which I do think speaks to what we're talking about here. It doesn't get abused, but they make sure that all those bikes are in running condition and they can pull them off a rack and they can take it out and enjoy it still. So,
indeed.
Yeah. And on that note, let's get in a word from our sponsor, Motul, who's helping bikes stay running for years to come.
All right, everybody, we're back. We're supposed to be moving on to the next question, which I'll do, I promise. But I did want to touch on one more thing about sort of bikes being in museums versus being ridden, I guess. I went to a track day recently, and I had just a very heartwarming experience where there were a couple of people at this track day that I didn't know very well, but they're sort of in the circle of people that I was hanging out with. And their bike, one guy had a BMW S1000 RR that threw a code and stopped working. And then another guy had an old 2-stroke Yamaha that wasn't charging the battery, so he couldn't use that. And people just like flooded these guys with bikes. it was just like, oh, take my bike, I got an extra one. You can take my little CBR, no problem. Just like take it out. Like tires should be fine. Like I'll check the pressures. And these two dudes rode other people's bikes for the whole next day, maybe a day and a half at the racetrack. And people were just like, no, take this. And it was such an awesome, it was sort of the opposite of what we're talking about. People
exactly.
Keeping
they want
things,
them to enjoy it. They want them to have the experience.
Exactly. Because they're at this track day and they know how much fun it is to ride around. And the idea of someone who's not even like necessarily a close friend, but like an acquaintance, a buddy at the track, the idea of them not having the experience of riding around a track was just like too much for them. And they were like, you got to take my bike. This one gal had her spare bike was a Panigale 959, and she was like, take it, you have to take it, like it should be all set. Like it was like so awesome. So I don't know, that's just an anecdote in this idea of bikes being ridden and how people feel about it that I thought was pretty heartwarming and cool.
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about in episode 1, right? When we had Patrick Garvin on, we talked about how many bikes are too many bikes, and I talked about like it's sometimes it's nice to have an extra bike to let somebody ride.
True.
But like if you're always doing that, then you're responsible for the maintenance for somebody else. But I do think for my personal philosophy, and I'd be interested to hear Ari's position on this, although I'm pretty sure I already know it. But like it's nice having an extra bike that you can give to a friend, or you can say to somebody that needs it, and you're at an event, like, oh, well, just take this one. That way we can both go enjoy this together. I think that's part of my personal philosophy of how I hope that I am, the majority of the time.
Yeah. I mean, all my bikes, like, as you guys are aware, none of them are precious. So I would always encourage other people to ride them. And I do that with my Versys. Like it gets rented on a peer-to-peer platform, and the mileage has doubled, and I have not put a single one of those miles in the odometer. Other people are enjoying it. It makes me super happy just to be able to facilitate a cool trip on their part that they wouldn't get to do otherwise. So
right.
similar to folks lending track bikes at the track. Like I think it's heartwarming. It's great to see.
Yeah, agreed. So the sort of second to last question we're going to cover here in the main part of the discussion goes like this: when does a preserver take it too far? When does a rider take it too far? And Ari, you sort of touched on the preserver thing, or maybe this is what you were going at when you were talking about the guy who collects the toolkit and polishes the rivets on the seat and that kind of thing. Like, can you expand on that at all? Like, how would you classify someone who maybe takes preservation too far?
I don't have any problem with them doing that. The problem I have with that scenario is when they then want to show me everything that they have done, and they show me the pinstriping where they're like, the factory Yamaha, it was 1.3 millimeters, so I made sure to get 1.3, and this is the same paint. That's when I'm like, dude, you're talking to the wrong guy here. Like, I just don't care. So that's the only way that I see it as being taken too far, is when they want to spoon feed you everything they've done on their restoration and preservation.
Okay. Spurg, you got any thoughts? I got something I want to put to you guys, but Spurg, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't like the overall complete restoration, and I think I kind of touched on that with my Moto Guzzi analogy. I don't think that there's anything wrong with it if that's what that individual gets their jollies off on. If like a 1.3 millimeter pinstripe is what keeps that guy going, then or girl, like then by all means.
There's some Highside, Lowside listener out there who's just crushed right now, who's like, I don't care about my pinstripes.
I'm happy for them. If that's what moves them, then all the power to them. I personally would rather have something where you can see a little bit of the wear, you can see a little bit of the rust, you can see a little bit of the use. To me, that is so much cooler than the museum never touched quality.
So
I had one more anecdote, but it speaks to my perspective, and Spurgeon, I think you'll appreciate this. I do restorations on the side in my garage for people. Like I just fix up bikes, and I had a guy. I like to do bikes that people want to ride. So like I don't repaint frames. I don't like to repaint tanks. I don't like to do any of that stuff. I had a guy who's like, oh, I want the engine cases soda blasted, and I'm gonna want like the head powder coated. And I literally was like, I'm not the guy for you, dude. Like I don't do that. Those aren't the builds I do. Right. So like I build them so that people can ride them and enjoy them. And it's a restoration, a functional restoration, but I don't want to restore stuff to make it beautiful so that it can be parked in someone's living room.
Did he go with you, or did he go with somebody else?
He ghosted me. He couldn't have gone with me. I said no.
So yeah, this is I like you're putting a flag in the ground somewhere, Ari, because you were like, it's personal choice, and if that's what you want to do, but you're like, I will not be a party to your living room queen. I won't do it,
because then the people are gonna be so particular. Whereas if they come in and they're like, the tank's dented and the frame's a little rusty, but like I just want it to work well, then like we're on the same page. But like I do not have the perspective of being like total detail restoration because I'm not into it. But if you're working with someone who's like that, that sounds like a pain in the ass.
Right. So to put a finer point on it, I would say maybe preservation goes too far when it washes away the patina of the machine and the life that it has lived, because
Absolutely.
that is the thing that sort of gives each VIN number its own kind of soul and character.
That's the story that motorcycle has lived.
Right. Yep. And this I wrote down as a note, Ari, your restoration of that CT90 that you did for the shop manual.
Not a restoration, a rebuild.
Right. So
big distinction.
So fair enough. And that's one of the things that I enjoyed about it, and I know that you enjoyed about it as well, is that you got it going. You sort of rehabbed it after this horrible torture of going across Alaska. But it still has like the paint worn away on the side and like chips in it and dents in the fender, because that's what makes that bike bike and not just another CT90.
There were a lot of comments from people who were like, oh, you should have painted the frame, you should have relaced the wheels, like you should have soda blasted the engine. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Like the oxidation on that case is from Arctic Ocean water because it rode to the top of Alaska. Like, I'm not going to erase that. That would be
blasphemy.
Idiotic. Yeah. Absolutely. So it was, and again, it's all personal choice, but basically in those comments, my reply was like, well, I'm the one that did the rebuild, and like, this is what I want it to be like. So like, you can soda blast your cases if you want, but I'm not down with that.
Well, it's interesting because like I get it a lot. So the last 2 bikes that I've sold were I don't store adventure bikes. I buy one, I use it, I move on to the next one, and the last 2 I sold were a Tiger 800 and a KTM 1090, and they were both used, right? And somebody made a comment about like, oh, I would never buy one of Spurgeon's bikes. Look at how he's destroying them. And the thing, like my bikes were always meticulously, mechanically maintained, wheel bearings and chains and valve checks and all of that, like meticulous. But the paint was rubbed off on the frame where the boots, sit, or the seats under the bottom of the seat was like shredded because, motocross boots came up a little bit taller. Like, so the bikes looked used, but they were always meticulously maintained because to me, I think those bikes look cooler and serve a function better if they have those battle scars that you've got stories to tell with.
Sure. So, the second part of that question was, when does a rider take it too far? Like, we're on the camp of, well, you should just ride bikes. They're meant to be ridden. You got to ride them. And you touched on this a little bit with what you just said, Spurge. But is it fair to say that a rider, a sort of like a rider-focused person who thinks bikes are meant to be ridden, such as the 3 of us, would take it too far when it's in disrepair, when the bike is
when
like
it's being,
not
when
in
it's
good
being
shape?
misused or abused, I think is where I would draw the line. Like if you've got an early RD 350 and it's meant to be a fun little sport bike and you've put a ton of miles on it and put new cranks in it repeatedly, like there's nothing wrong with that. Like keep riding it. But if you're like, oh, I'm gonna chop the front end off and turn it into a chopper and then take it off-roading, then you're kind of doing some foolishness that I don't necessarily approve of.
Or if your chain's dirty, right, Ari?
I mean, that's obvious abuse.
Right. I guess this goes back to Adam's original question, right? And I guess I disagree with Ari a little bit on this, and the fact that like if you've bought that motorcycle and you've paid for it and that's sitting in your garage, you can do whatever the hell you want to do. And like if your value for that bike comes for chopping off the front end, I get it. Like if you have a pristine Survivor from the 70s that hasn't been chopped and somebody's like, here's what I'm going to do with it, that breaks my heart. But I respect that. I respect that person's right to do it. They're not doing it with my money. They're doing it with their money. And if they're going to throw the value away of a pristine RD 350 or Triumph 650, then by all means, knock yourself out. Zach, what about you? When does a rider go too far? When? Zach? When?
If it's sort of dangerous, or even if it's just unwell mechanically, then I think that's taking it too far. Like Did the CT90 that went to Alaska get a new chain, Ari, or did you just clean it?
That's a good question. No, I put a new chain on it. They were like $17.99.
Yeah. So I think this is a good example. The chain that went to Alaska, sure, it's a piece of the bike that went to Alaska, and that's part of the patina in some way. But come on. Yeah. Put a good chain on the bike. Put a nice new clean chain on there so that functionally it works well.
So you're saying if someone's like, oh no, like in the CT90, if it was like I gotta keep like those wheel bearings are torched and the chain is gross, but like I gotta keep it because that's the original one, like that's sentimental. Then that's then you start wearing out the motorcycle because you're using things that are no longer within spec.
I'm not changing the tires. The one on the first day with my wife with those tires. I'm not changing the tires. Are you kidding me?
All right, that's definitely taking it too far.
Then we're taking it too far. And we are pro riders, right? We're sort of like, yeah, we should be riding like that. Don't lock it up. Don't put it in a museum. Let's ride
keep it in good nick.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that gets back to like you want to make sure that any bike that you're actually riding is well maintained and safe for the street. So, well,
Yes, indeed.
with that being said, let's now move on.
Yes.
And this is what we are calling the lightning round, not to be confused with the Rev Trivia game that we're going to play after the episode with Mr. Henning. So the lightning round is based on a game that we have all played, and we think that some of our listeners might have played in their youth. And the game that we're basing this off of is something along the lines of a game you might have heard of called like Marry, Fornicate, Kill.
Oh my God. I was wondering how you're going to present that.
Yeah. That's the PG-13 version of the game that you might have played.
Fornicate. You should say
yeah.
Copulate. Fornicate has like an intonation of taboo.
Okay. Copulate. Okay. You probably know which game we're talking about at this point.
Right.
Our game is going to be called Ride, Preserve, or Burn. So this is we're each going to take a turn presenting 3 motorcycles. You either have to ride the motorcycle, preserve the motorcycle, or burn the motorcycle. A forest fire goes through and the motorcycle's gone. You have to.
You don't have to throw the match at it.
No.
Of the
Okay,
of the 3, no, you do. I think of the 3 bikes, one you ride, one you preserve, and one you set on fire. So you only get to ride one. One goes away forever in a fire. The other one just stays in your living room, and you have to choose which.
So,
Okay.
so Zach, why don't you present your 3 bikes first, and we will discuss.
Okay, I had a bunch of the like. Maybe we can do more than one round if we get through it fast. So let's go. The first one I want to start with is very kind of like basic and understandable. I want to start with like bikes that everyone kind of hopefully has have an understanding of and they know what we're talking about, because I don't want it to be too obscure necessarily. So all these bikes are model year 2020, but they're late model, new bikes, newish, whatever. You got a Yamaha R1, you got an Indian Scout, and you got a Honda CRF 250L. So you've got a Yamaha Superbike, an Indian Cruiser, and a Honda 250 Dual Sport. Which one do you ride forever? Which one do you keep in your living room? Which one do you set on fire and burn?
That's a good one. I've got like the ride is easy in my opinion, but then like the preservation aspect of it, I think I got it figured out. It's a little
Okay, guest honors, go first, man.
So ride the R1.
Okay.
I'm perfectly happy to suffer on the freeway on an R1. I think it's a tremendous motorcycle. It's got a lot of potential. I like to do track days, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna burn the Scout.
Duh.
Probably. Yeah. And then like, I
it's
don't know why I would want a CRF to be preserved, but like it's
But it's
doesn't
the last one.
At least it doesn't take up a lot of space, and yeah, it's the last one.
I'm flip flopped. So I would probably ride the CRF because that speaks
Forever?
more. I mean, it's a CRF. Well, we're not playing forever. We're playing like of these 3.
Well, we didn't specify. So
There's a timeline.
do we want to give a duration? Is it like 3 years, 5 years?
I mean, we
Well,
don't.
the suggestion with
marry.
intercourse, marry, kill is that you it's forever. Yeah, it's the only one.
What's the intercourse correlate to?
That's riding.
Okay.
It's riding.
You said
I hate to say
I
it,
didn't want to say
but-
it. Yeah, I didn't want to say it. And then the
I would-
marrying is the preserving.
I guess with this, but the CRF 250L or 300L, I guess, depending on what we're looking at here. Like,
Yeah, whatever.
I would still pick that one because that allows me to go do the dual sport thing that I like to do. That is my adventure kick. That is something I
Sure.
could ride on the street. Like that's the
Okay.
bike that I'm going to get the most use out of.
Gotcha.
Versus putting TKC80s on an R1 and just just seeing what happens.
Or a Scout.
Yeah, no, the Scout. I rode a Scout once and it was not for me. It's too small. I'm too big. It's just not built for Spurgeon
One of
size
those
people.
things are
But a
made
CRF fits you perfectly, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm
gonna
exactly the right size for Spurgeon.
ride the Honda, preserve the R1, and I'm gonna set the Indian on fire. Zach, what about you?
This is why I think it's tough. I think the CRF 250 or CRF 300L is like clearly the most versatile bike. It's clearly the one that you want to trot across the city, you want to go on a dual sport ride, you want to do whatever. I mean, Itchy Boots is essentially riding one from Peru to Alaska. Like you can do whatever you want with that bike, which is cool. But that being said, I gotta go with the R1. I'm gonna go with the R1, which would knock my
Horsepower
socks
corrupts.
off. Yeah. And then
It's got that
my
wheelie
living
control.
room,
It's so satisfying.
oh, it's terrific. It's just lovely. As for the living room, I agree. I get where you're going with the 250L not taking up much space, Ari. But if I got to look at a bike, it might be a Scout. Like a Scout's kind of a handsome Americana look to it.
I mean, it was built to be looked at probably as much as ridden.
Okay, well, there's a little editorial for you. And I will say it breaks my heart, the idea of burning a Honda. I mean, it's just what a terrible thing to do. It's such a
it's a game where none of us are actually setting anything on fire.
I know, you're right, but it still hurts me. So there you go. I'm riding the R1, preserving the Scout, and I'm pushing the CRF 250 off a cliff.
That was a good trio. That was a good warm up.
All right.
Well, as long as we're still throwing things, as Ari is the guest, so we're going to keep throwing things at Ari. And we had one bike in our pick, Zach, that actually overlapped. So I know my audience, and I wanted to pick bikes that were going to be a little bit harder for you guys to discern between. Yamaha R1M, and these are all late model as well.
Sure. So the M is the fancy R1 that's carbon fiber bodywork and blah blah blah.
Yep. That's your sport bike option. Mm-hmm. Aprilia Tuono V4 1100.
Hallowed be its name.
I know who I'm talking to, and a BMW R1250 GS.
Ooh.
So you went with, rather than a widespread of bikes, you went with a widespread of excellent motorcycles. And which one do you?
That's very difficult.
I know my audience, gentlemen. So those are the three. So Yamaha R1M, BMW R1250 GS, and Aprilia Tuono V4 1100. And while you guys are thinking about that, just so our audience knows, Yamaha R1M, like we discussed, high-end sport bike, BMW R1250 GS, high-end adventure-oriented motorcycle, and then Aprilia Tuono V4 1100 is a high-end, super-power, naked motorcycle.
Oof. You want to go first, Ari? You ready?
I'm ready. I don't know what burning carbon fiber smells like, but I'm going to find out when I light that R1M on fire. And then I already worship at the altar of the Tuono, so why not actually create an altar to one in my living room? And then a GS is just undeniably, I mean, we've talked about this a million times. Like, if you're going to have one motorcycle to ride, like, that bike is great. So,
is it not going to break your heart every morning when you wake up and pour your bowl of Cheerios and sit down on your couch and you're sitting there looking at a Tuono and you know you can't ride it?
But I would know that I could ride a GS.
Yeah. You heard it here first, everybody. Ari says a GS is just as good as a Tuono.
Oh, not quite. Not quite. But I would feel there'd be a part of me that would feel good preserving a Tuono.
Okay. That's a good answer. It's a good answer. I might... I mean, there's no flaw in what Ari said. There's no flaw. That's arguably the right answer. But what if? And I'm just going to go with this for my answer. You don't need the R1 is the thing. With a Tuono, you don't need an R1. You don't need it. A Tuono can, if you want to ride an R1, you can get almost the same thing from a Tuono, whether it's on a track or on the street. So I'm also lighting the R1M on fire.
We're having an R1M bonfire, buddy.
We are, and it's what a heartbreaking thing again. But I'm riding the Tuono and I'm putting the GS in my living room.
Okay.
GS is kind of a fun piece of artwork. It's got all kinds of wacky angles and bars and tubes sticking off it. Fun to look at. It's an icon in the motorcycle world, I think, more so than a Tuono. And a Tuono, when you ride it around, you commute to work on it, take it to a track day, you're gonna thrill your socks off.
Yeah, you're not gonna be disappointed with that.
That's my answer.
Yeah, until we get to get on Adventure Fest, and you're gonna have Ari Henning on a BMW, and Zach, you're gonna have those TKC80s on your Tuono. We'll see how that works out for you.
We'll see.
We'll take turns. If it's back in the Black Hills, and there's plenty of street riding to do too.
True. What about you, Spurge?
I actually hadn't really thought about this too much from my perspective, but what I would say is I am probably going to go the Ari Henning route.
Yep.
I, too, will be torching my R1.
What? 3 torched M1s?
3 burned R1Ms.
Yeah. I'm going to go with the BMW to ride because I think that is more versatile. You can still take it to a track day. You can ride it off-road for adventure riding. You can commute on it like a comfortable couch, and the Aprilia is going to sit in my living room, and I'm going to stare at it every day.
Did you say you can take a GS to a track day? Is that what you just said?
Yeah,
you can do a GS to a track day.
I've seen you do it.
Yeah,
I've done it. It wasn't great. I'm gonna be honest.
Not great.
But it's if you have the option of not doing a track day ever again or riding a GS on a track, like you can do it.
Yeah, I also I did it had stock Michelins with like 40 pounds air in the tires, so it wasn't.
Yeah, and you said GSA, right?
Sure.
You did.
Did you say GSA?
I
think you did say
I don't
GSA.
think I don't know if I
I would
made the
prefer
difference.
standard GS personally, but
I think I did say GSA because GSA has the upgraded suspension.
and you can put sticky tires on it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep. So is it my turn to give y'all 3 bikes to work on?
It sure is, man.
it
Let's
is.
do it.
I took a very different tact.
I like this.
Nothing modern. Everything here is historically significant and will be presented to you as a 0-mile motorcycle. So,
Nice.
we have a 1969 Honda CB750, one of the most historic motorcycles of all time, extremely significant from a performance and manufacturing perspective. Then a 1972 Kawasaki H2 Mach 4. So that's the 3-cylinder 2-stroke fastest motorcycle on the planet at the time. And then
the H2 Mark IV. That's the
Widowmaker?
750.
Correct.
Copy.
3-cylinder 750.
Gotcha.
The Widowmaker. And then a
Widowmaker.
1985 GSXR 750, the old slab side. So first year of the modern perimeter aluminum frame, clip-on, full tuck sport bike. The very first official sport bike of all time. So, you got to ride one, you got to burn one, you got to preserve one.
I'll go quickly.
I don't have an answer. Yeah, I'm very keen to hear what you have to
I'll go
say.
quickly. I'm riding the Honda around. I'm putting the 2-stroke 750 in my living room, and I'm burning the GSXR.
Really?
I would have not guessed that with you.
It's a tough decision
Yeah.
any way you slice it.
It's horrible.
Okay.
Spurge?
I originally, as soon as you started reading those, I was like, oh, I want to ride the Kawasaki. And then I thought about riding the Kawasaki forever. And I was like, no, I really don't.
They're
Yeah.
pretty terrible to ride.
I honestly, the easy one is the one that I would ride. I would ride the Honda. I'm with Zach on that one 100%. I think the Honda is just your do-it-all, comfortable, reliable, even in, back
The
then.
original UJM.
Yeah. And that, for those of you listening, that's Universal Japanese Motorcycle. Where I'm struggling is like I kind of like the aesthetic of both of them for the last two, right?
Yeah.
I think the purist in me likes the lines of the Cowie, but if I've already got a UJM in
True. That's the tricky part.
True.
yeah, like
Yep.
I'm gonna set the Cowie on fire. I'm gonna put the first sport bike in my living room so I can stare
Okay.
at. I like the lines of those early sport bikes. I think that they're
First
very
GSXR
cool.
is a cool bike. I mean,
Yeah.
you're wrong, but that's I respect
we
you.
we can arm wrestle. You'd still win because you've got
don't know
those
about
arms. Ari, what about you?
Yeah.
I mean, Spurgeon, I appreciate your inclination to light the H2 on fire because it's a pretty polluting machine, and it probably deserves to just go off in a big puff of smoke. But I'd probably do the same thing as Zach. I'd probably ride the Honda. I think it would be a fun, comfortable bike. I would probably preserve the Mach 4. I really like the blue colorway of the first year 72, and I think it would just be a beautiful presentation piece in a home.
Sir.
It really is.
Expansion
Isn't it-
chambers always are.
Isn't that the colorway that you actually did preserve?
No,
In the-
I did a white and blue, and that was the
and blue,
H1,
okay.
so that was the 500.
Gotcha. Okay.
Came out before the H2. And then, I think I'd have to, maybe it's just because the GSXR is newer, so I assume there's more of them. And as much as I love sport bikes and appreciate the significance of that particular model, I think it would be ceremonial when I lit it on fire. Absolutely. It would be, it would be ritualistic. I wouldn't just burn the thing and walk away.
Well,
That was super fun. Could even be like a continuing segment on Highside, Lowside, as far as I'm
knows?
concerned. That was great.
if any of you listeners disagree or have your own picks, go ahead and shoot us an email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com. Throw comments in the video below and let us know where you stand on which of those motorcycles you would like to ride, preserve, and burn.
So do we have? I do have an extra one queued up. Would you guys do one more, or do you want to move on? What's the feeling? I'm trying to read the room here.
We have time for one more round, so go
Okay.
for it.
It's similar to Aries, but there's a curveball in there. So, Spurgeon, really quick, what was your first motorcycle?
That I actually owned was my Bonneville, my T100.
Your
Bonneville.
first bike.
Yep.
Whatever you consider your first bike.
Yep.
Th-
My
it's
Triumph,
your-
my Triumph,
your
my Triumph
Bonneville.
Bonneville, 2005.
Okay.
Yep.
Ari?
Like an 83 Z50. Is that
Nice. Okay.
I mean, first motorcycle.
Yeah, that counts. I would count mine probably. I guess It was a Suzuki RM80, but I also had an XR80 that was kind of like my first bike. Whatever. Here's the challenge. The first Vespa ever produced, the very first one, VIN number 001, 0 miles. The very first Ducati Monster ever, VIN 001, 0 miles. And your first motorcycle. So 2 Italian icons and your first bike. You gotta burn one, save one, and ride one.
Okay.
You ready, Ari?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Well, I'm certainly not riding a 1983 Z50.
Mini bikes do make it a little bit easier, don't they?
And they've sure made a lot of those things. And I, as I recall, left it as a smoldering heap anyway. So I'd probably just burn it.
You'd burn your first bike.
I'd burn my first bike. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, these are tough decisions we have to make here.
Stone cold. Okay, continue. So which one? I think I know which one you'd save and which one you.
I'm also not inclined to make an original, presumably hand shift 2-stroke slow, loud Vespa my daily rider. So I would preserve that because I think, again, I'm actually thinking about like what's going to look good in the living room, and I think a monocoque frame stamped steel Vespa is going to look beautiful. They're iconic anyway, right? Like people who don't even know motorcycles are going to appreciate it. And then I'd ride the Monster, great little motorcycle.
Good answer. Solid answers, Spurgeon.
I like it. So I would Bonneville T100, my first bike. I would just keep riding that. And that's kind of, that bike brings me a lot of joy. That's
your plan anyway, right?
Yeah. That bike's not going anywhere. So that bike would definitely get ridden, not preserved. I think where you threw me, I really like the later generation Ducati Monsters. Specifically the 06 is the one that comes to mind, with the offset racing stripe. But the original version, it just doesn't do much for me from a aesthetic standpoint. And if I'm not gonna ride it, I don't want to look at it. So I would burn the Ducati, and I would keep the scooter. I mean, that's arguably Spencer Roberts' most beautiful motorcycle of all time. Yeah. So, if I want to ever have him come and visit, and stay in the guest bedroom, then I'm going to have
interesting
Vespa.
Motivation there.
Yeah, I'm at the Vespa in the living room.
Okay.
What about you, Zachary?
Well, I think partially for the sake of switching it up, but also this was in my mind. It would be heartbreaking to crush or burn the original Vespa, but I think that's what I would do. And I would ride the Monster around, and I would put my first bike in my living room.
Is your first bike still around?
The RM is not. The little 2-stroke 80 that I had, that went away. That was technically the first bike my parents got me, and then it kind of bit me a couple times, and they thought, let's get him a 4-stroke. He doesn't seem too bright. So I had that Honda XR80, which
is still around, right?
Which, is still around. My dad still has it. Actually, when you and I went to Vermont earlier this year, Ari, I was hoping to dig it out and putt around on it just for
that would have been good.
Old time's sake. But anyway, that bike is still around, and I would probably that very machine that there's a I mean, I don't know how famous it is. It's famous within the circle of friends that Ari and I have. A picture of Ari and I jumping over a little jump in Canada when we were like 10 or 12 years old.
Huge. It was like
and that was that bike.
That's that bike. That's the XR80 that my dad still.
So you have access to that motorcycle. Like, do you think you will put it in a living room at some point?
I hope so. I guess that's a negotiation I have to work on with my roommate.
Yep. Fair enough. But it's nice to know that's a possibility. You two each have the option of fulfilling your statements.
Yeah, true. Well, yeah, except for the whole getting our hands on the very first Ducati Monster.
You get to preserve your first bike, and Spurgeon gets to continue riding his first.
Continue riding.
Yeah, it's not like we're going to find an original Vespa and set it on fire. We're not gonna live this dream out completely.
Okay, so yeah, so the final. This can be quick. Any bikes that have come up in conversation that you sort of like had a tickle that you wanted to bring up later? Any unmentioned bikes thus far that you might consider buying and not riding? I mean, based on our answers so far, it seems like everybody just has the riding mentality.
It wouldn't be part of the calculus in the purchase. I would not buy it to not ride it. I would buy it because I wanted to ride it.
Right. So here's a final question then that I came up with mid cast, if you will. When you were talking about sentimental bikes, you were both saying, like Spurge, your Bonneville your old Triumph Bonneville, you're like sort of, it has sentimental value to me, but it's not actually necessarily worth a whole lot of money. Ari, same thing with your dad's CB350, sentimental value, not necessarily worth a lot. Same thing with my personal KTM 950 Supermoto. Here's a question for you to round it off. What if the bike that has sentimental value to you suddenly had actual monetary value? What if each of these sentimental bikes that the three of us have brought up was for some reason worth $1 million, $2 million, $10 million? How would that change the calculus at all? Like, would you still go and race that bike, Ari? Spurgeon, would you still ride that bike around if for some reason it was worth millions of dollars?
Is selling it an option?
I was going to say, I don't know what kind of financial situation you guys are in, but if you told me that bike was worth millions of dollars, like
my dad would kick me right in the nuts if I didn't sell it for $2 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
He'd be like, we can build another one. But if you can't sell it, well then, if you can't sell it, then the value is pointless.
No, let's do this. Because I like this scenario more. You're already a millionaire. Money is no object to you. I just bestowed upon you the Powerball jackpot. You don't need the money to sell it.
Interesting.
Well, then
but it does have value. It does have value. So like
it's worth $2 million to someone else, but $2 million doesn't mean anything to you. Then it kind of like it's 6 of one, half of the other, right?
Then we're in the same boat.
We're in the same boat.
With. Yeah.
I think it's more interesting. So you would sell your dad's bike, Ari, if it was worth $1 million or $2? Did you just like out the door?
If some collector came to me and was like, "I'll give you $2 million for that thing," yeah, I'd sell it.
Okay. What about you, Spurge?
I do something real nice for my dad.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Spurge, would you sell your Triumph Bonneville for $1 million?
Probably. Yeah.
He reads financial magazines.
Yeah.
He's not an idiot.
Yeah.
Kiplinger, no self-respecting Kiplinger's reader would ever say no to that answer.
I honestly like that. It breaks my heart to say it, but yeah, I probably would. I mean, for $1 million, it'd probably be on the old auction block. What about you? Your KTM, $1 million.
I'm not going to answer that question. Let's move on.
No. You can't let us sit here. We're not going to sit here looking like Scrooge McDuck and you walk away scot-free.
Haven't thought.
I think I'm more conflicted. I'm definitely more conflicted than Ari is. I think I'm more conflicted than Spurgeon. It would be really hard for me. It'd be really hard.
A life-changing amount of money for a motorcycle that you could just go out and buy another one of.
A life-changing motorcycle. Yeah, I suppose I could buy another one.
I think part of this
maybe that's part of the whatever.
No, go. No, I just
no. I don't want to complicate it.
No, I know, but I think it's like part of the difference for these particular bikes for each of us is that it's part of like it's made us who we are to an extent, right? Like part of the reason that I'm sitting in the seat that I'm at right now is because I bought that motorcycle 17 years ago. Same. And the same for the bikes you folks are talking about. Like the reason that Ari, that bike and the catalyst of what that meant for you and your racing career and everything else, and Zach, the fact that was your bike that really transformed your West Coast experience in motorcycling.
Yeah.
Like I think that's the difference when we're talking about, if it was just the value, if it was just the $1 million, yeah, you cash it in, take the check, go buy another one. But like that specific bike changed my life in a way that I don't know if other people have that experience to the same extent.
Yeah.
But you're not less of a person because you sold the bike. Like those experiences are still.
Well, you're not less of a person unless you feel like less of a person because you don't have that thing with you.
But you chose money over this thing that got you to the point. I don't know. It's a hard one.
It would be fun to run rampant with all the caveats. Like, would you do it if you have the money but you couldn't ride motorcycles anymore? It'd be fun.
Are they buying it to preserve it or because they too want to enjoy it?
They want to play.
That would change my perspective.
They're going to play Ride, Preserve, Burn, and they're going to burn it. So they're spending $1 million on to set it on fire.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we still have time, but it brings up something that I'm attempting to do with one of my father's old race bikes. That was kind of the peak of his career, which is return it to Henning ownership, rebuild it, not restore it, rebuild it, race it, and then potentially see if Barber's interested in it.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of a long range plan I've been working on for a while. I'm in communication with the guys that have it, but it's like it kind of brings into conflict. For me, the CB350 is easy. That's a hammer. Like you use it as a tool, but the Drixton actually represents what everything that my dad was trying to achieve in his career and all of the innovation and ambition that he had is like very much symbolized by that one motorcycle, like going up against X Factory race bikes. So can you back up and give us like the 60-second version of your dad, why he built this bike, what this bike was, why it's significant historically? My dad raced Honda Twins in the late 80s and 90s, and he raced them in a club that had a class called Premier 500, which was meant to be for Grand Prix bikes of the era. So you had like 3-cylinder MV Agustas and G50s, like bikes that are worth a tremendous amount of money and are historically significant. And then my old man rolled up with a Honda CB450 that he managed to get a lot of horsepower out of it and put it in a frame that was period correct and won. He won against all those other motorcycles, probably because he was willing to ride it in a way that I am also willing to ride motorcycles, which is fairly recklessly if that's what's needed. But that motorcycle got auctioned off when my dad got hurt, so I've been wanting to ride it and bring it back into the family for a long time. But I also don't want to keep it. I don't want to have that be another bike that I have around that I roll out and race. I already have one of those. So the idea
we're running out of room in RevZilla West lobby.
We're running out of room, yeah. So the idea of it, honoring my father by being part of the American competition series that Barber has. They've got like a kind of a wing that they utilize for that sort of thing. I think it'd be really cool, but it also kind of goes against what I've been saying, which is like it's meant to be ridden. But it would be ridden. I would want to race it before it actually went to the museum.
And maybe in addition to that, you could go back once a year, and they'll let you be the person that takes it out and rides it around the track once in a while.
Maybe.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, all of these conflicts are emblematic of why these conversations are fun, and why like you sort of you offer shape to the love that you have for motorcycles, whatever that is, whether it's riding or looking at them or whatever. So it's super fun. This is a great conversation.
And Adam, I know we answered your question last season, but hopefully this gives you a more thorough investigation into where our thoughts are coming from. And with that being said,
preserve that SRX, Adam. Obviously, put it in a museum. Don't ride it.
So with that being said, the episode topic has come to an end, but the shenanigans are just beginning. We have the Rev Trivia game. So this is a game that we kicked off last episode. Ari, we're going to walk you through the rules.
Alrighty.
We have an engine sound. Zach and I have not heard this engine sound. We are going to play it for the first time, and all three of us are going to get to guess, guest honors. If we can't guess, we are going to have hints. I have a envelope here with hints and the final answer in it.
Just like the Oscars.
So we can start off by playing the sound. All of you listening, you get to play along at home. If you are in your car or your home, wherever your home is right now.
Shout it out if you know it.
Yep. And we're going to go ahead and we are going to play the sound. Now, what we are doing with our audience too is we are asking that if you would like to participate in the game and you would like to try to stump Spurgeon Dunbar, Zach Quartz, or in this case, Ari Henning, you can send us an email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com with an engine sound of your own. You just have to record it on your personal cell phone device and send it over an email. We do ask that you give us at least a 30-second clip, let it idle, give us a couple of good revs, let it idle again, as you will hear in this clip right now.
You get the idea. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But if we do pick your engine sound, we will send you a free T-shirt because we know people love T-shirts. So without any further ado, let's take a few seconds here and everybody listen to your engine sound.
Ooh. Okay, so
I feel like Ari's still listening to his engine sound.
I didn't realize I was supposed to press play. I thought you were going to press play for all of us.
So I feel like I know what country it's from. I'll get the conversation started. It's a 180-degree crank, twin cylinder.
Yep.
And it's probably Japanese.
Yep.
What else you got, Ari?
The starter motor is actually what gave me
the
strongest
same
inclination of what it was, because the idling engine, there's a lot of engines that sound like that, but there's a specific whir to it, and frankly, the starter whine was what gave me a little bit of a clue. I'm not super confident in what it is, and
You think it's green?
No, I don't.
No.
No.
Interesting.
I'm historically not good at this. You're better at this. We've played this game sitting around.
I think it's really fun. I love this game. This game was my idea, but I don't pretend to be
Let's do it again.
particularly good at it. So you don't think it's a Kawasaki starter motor, Ari? That's what I thought. What did you think? You think
I thought
it's
it was a Honda. I was thinking.
I think.
Am I allowed to say models yet?
Oh,
I think you're both wrong.
You think we're both wrong?
I
I'm
think
certainly in agreement with the parallel twin. Not necessarily 180, frankly, but parallel twin life for sure.
I think it could be a twin, but I think it could also be a triple. I think listen to it again. I think I think
Oh,
you're right. It could be a large.
Is it
large
that
displacement.
weird?
because
Is it that weird Triumph triple?
Keep in mind
Yeah.
the new Triumph,
Cross-plane triple or whatever?
the new
Not
Triumphs have
cross-plane?
it's the cross plane, or not the cross plane, but the T plane crank.
T-plane crank, right? Which has yep.
That's
Yeah,
true.
I'm-
Now I'm like I was confident at first,
But like listen to that starter, right? Like
yeah.
It does sound like the starter's laboring, and it's probably not a Ninja 400 or a CBR 500.
I've got a Tiger 1200 here. Am I allowed to go start it real quick and listen?
go for
No.
it. Yeah, why? Yeah, let him do it. That's better. It's better than a hint.
All right,
It's better
let's
than
do
a
it.
hint
Let's
that
do-
we're
no,
gonna
no,
give.
Let's do a hint. I don't want to leave the screen and go
before
start a bike.
we do the hint, I think as a group, I don't know. I like
I feel like I'm impressionable though. Like now he's saying 3-cylinder, so like now I'm like, ooh, it does sound like a Triumph. But I was thinking Honda 270 twin.
So you were
twin.
thinking CB, like CB 500F, CB 500X.
No, I was thinking bigger. I was thinking Africa twin.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm
Come on,
listening again.
let's get a hint. Come on.
Okay, we need a hint. I think Spurge is right.
Hint number one. Hint number one is triple.
Okay.
All right,
Well,
so
then
it's
I'm going with the Tiger 1200.
or the Tiger 900.
It sounds big and lopey though.
Does. Okay. Yeah. So Ari's going with Triumph Tiger 1200.
And no mods, bone stock.
Yeah. It's a pretty quiet pipe. Spurge?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say. I mean now with that first hint, I definitely think it's either the 900 or the 1200.
If you don't pick the right bike, it's gonna get lit on fire.
I'm gonna guess 900.
Ooh. Okay.
I like
Zach?
that we're all thinking, the adventure bike category because it doesn't sound like a sport bike idle. It's too lopey.
Yeah.
It's too long. Stroke.
Yeah, you're right. Yep.
And honestly, the Triumph triples in the sport category have like a higher pitch whine to
Yep.
them.
Oh yeah, this is definitely not a
Not an
This is
RS,
for sure-
not a street triple,
Yeah.
not a street triple or a speed triple. No way. Yeah.
and not a Trident or anything like that.
Zach, do you have a guess before I give out the second hint?
I'm going 1200. I'm going with what
All right.
Ari said.
Let's flip the page. The final hint: shaft
drive.
So, for those of you that aren't
1200.
familiar, if you know your motorcycles, you know that I am wrong automatically because the Tiger 900 does not have a shaft drive. The Tiger 1200 does have a shaft drive.
It
Let's
also has a lot of driveline lash.
let's go ahead and see if you two knuckleheads are correct. The answer is covered up with Post-it notes. Let's look under the Post-it. Oh, I just read. Those are some strong Post-it notes, Chase. All right. It is a 2022 Triumph Tiger 1200 Rally Pro.
And
Sourced-
it says sourced by Spencer Roberts. So
sourced
it's the
by
one.
I'm
Spencer
looking
Robert.
at the bike right here, so I kind of cheated.
Spencer
great.
Robert
You
is
mean
the
to tell
one that
me
got us that
He didn't
sound.
want to kick over my 300 XTW and let us hear that thing idle.
Yeah, seriously.
I honestly am
What a lazy-
almost disappointed he didn't pick one of the wackier. Don't you have like a Lavarda in the bathroom?
Lafarda.
It's an
What is that?
Italica. It's a Mexican department store bike.
Yeah, it's Lavarda.
Which actually would have been kind of hard to pick out because we also have a Vespa and we also have a CRF 50 and we have a CBR 300. So it probably would have been kind of hard to pick out.
I know. But that was fun though.
That was fun.
I
That
was
was super
off.
fun.
I was off base. I thought it was a little Japanese twin, And Spurgeon, your delicate ear, you got that. You picked out the triple.
I'm not good at much, but when it comes to Triumph motorcycles, I'm a bit of a savant, if you will.
And rewiring guitar pickups. Evidently.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that is going to be the end for our guest, Mr. Henning. Zack and I have still more action for those of you listening with the T-shirt winners and the comments. But Ari Henning, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode.
Yeah, guys, that was a lot of fun. Looking forward to doing it again.
So hopefully you enjoyed playing along with all of our games in today's episode. But as a reminder, if you have an engine sound for us, go ahead and send it over, and you might get a chance to win a T-shirt if we pick your engine sound, much like if you give us an Apple Podcast review. It helps us get distribution for the podcast out there. It helps get recognition for the people to find the show. And we like to reward people that take the time to give us an Apple Podcast review by sending them a free T-shirt. So, Zack, who is the winner today?
The winner today of the very free T-shirt is Johnny Turlet, who left an Apple Podcast review that I might not read the whole thing, but here are the highlights. Johnny Turlet says, I have listened to all the episodes within the span of a week. Quick sidebar, you might want to get a CAT scan or something. I'm not sure that's good for your health to listen to that much Highside, Lowside. Johnny says, while I do enjoy the show very much, a silence seems to fall over my headphones anytime the Africa Twin is mentioned by Zack. Well, not quite silence, Johnny says, as Spurgeon Dunbar can be audibly heard frowning. He avoids even mentioning the name of this bike, as if he is somehow going to accidentally summon the Candyman. The only time he's uttered a word about it, he said when the motorcycle was, quote, too heavy for a 6'7", 380-pound NFL offensive lineman. So basically, Johnny Turlet is saying... let me see here. Johnny Turlet owns an Africa Twin. You might not be surprised to hear a 2019 version. It says, I bought this Africa Twin. It's the only vehicle I've ever bought new, and I would like to have my purchase validated because the cheapskated me is constantly telling me to go back to a Suzuki DR350. So Johnny basically does not appreciate that Spurgeon constantly throws shade at the Africa Twin and would like an audible yes that you, Spurgeon Dunbar, understand and appreciate the value of a 2019 Africa Twin.
Well, he also goes on to say that at least I deserve props for not getting a Himalayan, which I think is I thought that was very pertinent, and I made sure to read that because you skipped over it. He also goes on to say that he'll take his T-shirt in a medium or a Spurgeon extra small, which I thought was pretty good too. So
it's funny because Spurgeon's big, everybody.
The Africa Twin is a great bike, Mr. Turlet, and I think we all know what you're doing with that name. It's very much in the line of like a Simpsons prank phone call, and we get it, and we're going to keep saying it out loud because we think it's funny too, Mr. Turlet. But I will not only validate you and say the Africa Twin is a lovely motorcycle, but I'm sure Mr. Quartz will validate your purchase as well.
Absolutely. I think it's a great bike. You done good there, Johnny. And we'll try to twist Spurgeon's arm behind his back, figuratively, of course, because he's a large fella, so you don't want to actually physically attack him, and make him admit that the Africa Twin is a good bike in general. So, thank you so much for your podcast review, and your commentary on the cast. You will, of course, get a free T-shirt provided you send your T-shirt size. Which you already did, actually, medium, Spurgeon extra small, and your mailing address to Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com, as any winner should do.
Johnny, we liked your review because it's clear with all these funny little nuances that you put into this that you listened to a lot of Highside, Lowside episodes, just like you said you did. It wasn't like you bragged about listening to all the episodes and you didn't really give us any indication that you did. We can tell by some of the jokes that you threw in here that you have listened to way too much Highside, Lowside, frankly. So let's go ahead and we'll move right along into our comment section. This is for those of you that have shot us an email to highsidelowside at RevZilla.com, or maybe you left a comment on YouTube. The first one comes in from Christopher, who sent us an email and said, here is my question for you and Zack. you get to ride a lot of new motorcycles in your line of work. Can you tell me what's the deal with all the buttons on the controls of motorcycles nowadays? Now, when I first started reading this, I was like, Christopher must be my father's age, right?
Yeah, this guy's retired. 100%.
My dad complains all the time about like way too much high fandangled things that I can't figure out. My dad doesn't actually talk like that.
Yeah,
So
Spurgeon's dad is a Texan rancher, for those of you that have never met him.
So we kept reading Christopher's comment, and he says, my first bike was a 91 CB750, currently riding a CB500F. Again,
More fuel to the fire of him being 65 or 70.
yeah, I mean,
But continue.
1991 is like 31 years ago. So we're like, okay, it's got to be
Right.
at least 50 to 55 years old. Then goes, I'm 39, which is how old Zach and I are. And I see the controls and I feel like I would just fumble around like my grandparents using a smartphone. Is there currently a new bike being produced that has a more simple layout?
This is a good question and a fun one because it is we could arguably have another podcast about how many newfangled dangled buttons are on all these bikes. And something that Spurgeon didn't mention in that in Christopher's question was that he did bring up the Africa Twin. Johnny, you'll be, if you haven't turned off the podcast by now, you'll be happy to know. But mentioned the Africa Twin, and especially the Africa Twin, the new one has two screens. It has a small LCD screen that has a 2-color screen that has some information on it, and then it has a big, huge color TFT with Apple CarPlay and blah, blah, blah. So it's a particularly intense and potentially confusing dash setup. So that's some context for his question as well. Spurgeon, does a bike come to mind that is simple and new?
It sounds like Christopher's riding a CB500F right now, which is a new motorcycle and it's pretty simple. Not a lot of buttons there.
How about let's make it more difficult. Let's say, because there are lots of small bikes for new and returning riders or whatever, your Ninja 400s, your Honda CB500Fs, your Royal Enfield Himalayans that are not particularly complex because they're small and affordable and small.
Well, it sounds
the point is
like
a big bike,
yeah,
full size.
It sounds like Christopher's looking at an adventure motorcycle, and right now I am hard pressed to think of any adventure motorcycles that come to mind that don't have an inordinate amount of buttons. Like
Tenere 700.
Tenere 700 is really going to be the best bet.
Pretty simple.
But keeping in mind that those buttons all do have functions when it comes to adventure motorcycling. And
what do you mean? You mean the ones that are complicated? This is where you defend adventure motorcycling dumb and you say, oh no, we got to have all the things.
I don't think we have to. I think there's a reason that the Tenere 700 is a huge seller. But like you're not going to have off-road ABS. You're going to be able to turn your ABS on or off. So if you like having a little bit more control over those things, which I know a lot of people do, you're not going to have that. Those buttons all do serve a purpose. But easily, I mean, Zach, you called it. If you're looking in that segment and you want something with minimal buttons, the Yamaha Tenere 700 is the bike to beat.
Right.
Hands down.
What about non-adventure bikes? Because one does come to mind for me. Full-size
What do we
machines.
got?
So I wrote a review that I'm... I was fond of the motorcycle. I think the review came out okay.
Yamaha?
If I do say so myself.
XSR 900?
The Triumph... No, that bike is getting complicated too. The
Oh, is it?
Triumph
Okay.
Speed Twin, which is the... It's essentially a Triumph in the classic Bonneville line, but it sort of uses the sort of Bonneville chassis. It has a slightly canted forward riding position. It's a little bit sporty, and it uses the Thruxton 1200 HP, or like the high output Thruxton engine. So it's got the high horsepower engine, but it has the more relaxed chassis. And I think it's one of the most underrated motorcycles for sale today. It's terrific to ride. It's excellent. It's fun. It's engaging. It makes a great noise. It handles well, and it's simple. It just has a speedo and attack, and it has a little mode button where you can flick through a few ride modes. You can turn off traction control, and that's it. There's really nothing to it, and I think it's excellent.
I think it's interesting. I like that bike a lot. And it goes back to, earlier in this episode when I was talking about my T100, one of the things that I love about that bike is that it is simple. I mean, there's even less on that because there is no ABS, there is no traction control.
Right.
But I think Triumph's done a good job with their modern classic lineup in general, whether it's the Street Twin or the Street Scrambler, or which is actually getting its name changed. The Street Scrambler is now, I think, just going back to a regular Scrambler for what it's worth. There was I think I just read that for 2023.
Okay.
But anyway,
Gotcha.
Triumph's modern classic line does do a good job of keeping it simple. Where they don't is when you get up into their adventure line, there's a lot of buttons and there's a lot of things you have to push twice. And I don't think that the Triumph layout is necessarily the easiest to navigate or the most intuitive. For
a lot
what
of
it's worth.
things you got to push twice.
Yeah,
that's a good way to put it. So there's our answer. Perhaps a modern classic Triumph or Yamaha Tenere 700. But yeah, a lot of big adventure bikes. They complex, man. Next comment. I think this is your turn.
No, I just read the last one.
You read the last one?
Yeah.
My short-term memory's leaving me. It's because I'm 39 years old and I'm whatever. This comment comes in from Santiago via email. It says, "Thanks to great content. It helps me endure the lack of motorcycles in my life." Good looking out, Santiago. I'm looking to buy my first motorcycle, and I have a problem. I love them all. Do I start in the dirt? Do I start on the track? Do I keep low speed? What are the things that I should do? Maybe spend some time on the street before trying to learn new techniques in the dirt, or do I just go straight to a Hayabusa?
Well, Santiago clearly listens to Highside, Lowside because he knows our thoughts on a Hayabusa as a beginner motorcycle.
Bike. Exactly.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
End of story. Especially if you're going to ride in the dirt, actually. Of course, we're kidding. A 1300cc hypersport motorcycle is not the right place to start. And luckily, we can read Santiago's sarcasm, and he understands that. What do you think, Spurge? Do you start in the dirt, or do you start on the street, or what do you say here?
Well, so this is one of those questions that Zach and I kind of debated a little bit before the episode. What I think is really interesting right now is that when I started learning how to ride, I came on a little bit later to the sport than young Zachary did, and I remember, I really learned from taking an MSF course. And I think what's really interesting now for Santiago and for a lot of you out there listening, because we do get a lot of questions and comments from people that actually don't ride motorcycles. They listen to the podcast because they're thinking about riding a motorcycle. So we felt this was a good nugget in the fact that the Motorcycle Safety Foundation program in a lot of states is some states it's free. Like in the state of Pennsylvania, it's actually free. It's paid for by motorcycle registration dollars. And then in other states, it's like a couple $100. They give you a motorcycle. They teach you how to ride it. They can actually provide some of the gear for you, so you don't have to put a big investment in up front. And now they're also offering off-road MSF courses, so you can actually go and learn on a little dual sport and do the off-road thing. So in Santiago's case, he could potentially sign up and do an MSF program. He could do one on the road, off the road. And then there's other little programs like we talked about American Super Camp, which is a little like flat track school where they teach you how to ride on little 125s. Now, that school does factor in that you have a little bit of previous riding knowledge, more so than just complete beginners. But there's still opportunities out there for Santiago, especially with the MSF course, that you could get the beginner flavor of both on-road and off-road before you commit to making a purchase.
So
Zach,
you think
what do you want to add?
Start in the dirt.
No, I think take them both. I think take the MSF course on the street, take the MSF course off-road, try them both, and see which one Santiago prefers.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, I'll draw a little clearer line in the sand, just maybe for the sake of argument. I think you start off public roads. That's my suggestion for you, Santiago. I don't know where you live. I don't know if this makes life really difficult for you, but if possible, my suggestion is to start away from public roads and don't do the MSF, street riding course yet. Just get a dirt bike, go to a parking lot, or like go to an off-road riding area, or immerse yourself in learning how to use an off-road school is a great idea, to Spurgeon's point. Basically, here's where I'm going with this. Try to gain some amount of understanding and fluency in controlling the machine before you subject yourself to traffic and streets and that kind of thing. That's what I think. And it's a very broad statement. It's not for everybody necessarily, but today, that's my advice.
I think so. I'm going to disagree with you on the go buy a dirt bike standpoint. What I would recommend to Santiago is get a cheap dual sport that could be used either on or off road. I think sometimes And the example I'll give you is when Nicole first expressed interest in wanting to get a motorcycle, she came to me with a Craigslist ad for like a 1985 Honda CR 250 two-stroke, and was like, I found like this bike looks cool, and it's only a 250. Can I get this as my first bike? And I was like, no, because I'm not working on it, and it'll kill you. And what we settled on was the Kawasaki 230L, which is new. It's reliable. It's a 4-stroke. It's timid. So for somebody that doesn't know the difference, it's not blindly go out and buy a dirt bike. For Santiago, you can get a KLX 230L. It's approachable. It's easy to ride. You can do what Zach says, which is find a field, ask a farmer's permission first, or if you have some legal trails, you can just ride around in a dirt parking lot. And then you do have a license plate on the back. So if you want to, maybe ride down to the grocery store, ride back and get your feet wet with that, you have the option of having a motorcycle that can do a little bit of both.
Once you are licensed, of course.
Of course.
Right.
Or permitted.
Well, I stand by my original advice, which is to blindly buy the first dirt bike you find. So...
You heard it first, folks. Zach Quartz and Spurgeon Dunbar do not agree on this, just so we're clear. When you do that, that's Zach's advice.
That was obviously good advice that Spurge gave out there for the plated dual sport thing, and then you can kind of like pick and choose. But the point is, whatever. I made my point. We can move on.
You get your point, man.
It's time to thank you for listening, everybody. If you're watching on the YouTubes, please leave a comment below. If you're listening to the podcast through only your ear holes, then please send us an email to Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com with any questions, comments you can think of. Especially send engine sounds, a 30-second clip of a motorcycle running and revving and shutting off. We may use it, and if we use it on the air, we'll send you a free T-shirt. And in general, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. We got one thing we're doing in season 6 here, which is the what did we learn today? And Spurge, I think you should go first this time. What was your big takeaway from this episode?
I realized how unified you and Ari and I are on wanting to ride motorcycles, not preserve motorcycles. And I also learned that when you flash $1 million in front of our faces, we're willing to sacrifice a piece of our personal history quicker than I was expecting. Not so much you, but Ari and I were like, money motivates us in a way that I wasn't aware of before this.
Right.
I learned something about myself today.
You learned something about yourself.
Yeah. And so if anybody wants to come flashing a check for $1 million for a 2005 Bonneville T100 with about 80,000 miles on it, I'm your guy.
All right. Well,
what about you? Did you learn anything, Zach? Was there anything that struck you as a fancy for this episode?
I learned that you're a subscriber to Kiplinger's magazine. Spurgeon Dunbar looking out for his future, his retirement, his portfolio. Good gosh darn it for him. Look at him go there. He's holding it up for those of you that can't see. So yeah, we learned something about each other and ourselves when it comes to finances in this episode, and I think that's as good a note as I can think of to end on.
So without any further ado, we want to thank you for joining us for the most recent second episode of Highside, Lowside Season 6. Until next time, for Zach, for myself, adios.